Hello, everyone. Good evening. I hope you can hear me. So I am Mary Mealy. I'm going to be facilitating tonight's webinar. So if you just see the chat, that's where we're going to be communicating and connecting. So if you could just tell me a little bit about you and how old your kids are, any questions you have. If you want to tell me where you're writing from, if you're in New York, if you're somewhere else, you can just get the chat going to start us off. I hope this is sounding all right. Maria, I know you're on. Can you just text in the chat just so I can make sure I'm getting that, if you see that, or Eva? Yes, perfect. Okay, great. So, great. Well, welcome, Monique. Thank you so much. Thanks, Eva. All right, so we're just gonna give it another minute, but while we do, just some housekeeping. So we're going to go through a presentation, but in addition, I definitely want everyone to feel very comfortable with asking questions, and I'm going to interrupt myself to check the chat and make sure that everyone is feeling attended to. So definitely make sure you put your questions in the chat. I'll make sure I get to it. So Monique is saying, I have a 6th grader, works diligently, 2nd grader, loses steam at 9:30. How to keep going until the end of the school day without tears. Oh, yes. Okay, we'll definitely touch base on that for sure. For sure. All right. So if you want to just get into the chat and tell me a little bit about where you're from, any questions you have, that would be great. Hopefully we can also just support each other, which is always a good thing. All right, so this is also being recorded. So if you have any friends or anyone who needs any support, we'll definitely be happy to send over the recording. It'll be on our YouTube channel. Okay, so let's get started. So we are talking tonight about how to teach your children, because due to this pandemic, we are now not only ourselves as the head of the family, perhaps, but we are now also endeavoring to teach our children and to really help them to learn. And I think from what I hear, and as a parent myself, this is a really different position to be in. And I wanted to give parents some thoughts that I have around how you can teach your children and how you can think about organizing all of this in your own mind to really just develop your child well. That's kind of what we're aiming for, I think, in general anyway. And I really hope today's presentation offers you a different way of thinking about teaching your children. So I'm just going to get right into it. Okay. So I always like to kind of do things that I think work in presentations. And I did a presentation with Helen Day last week, and this was one of her slide setups. And I just thought it was such a great way to start it off. So I'm going to tell a little story to start us off with. And this is a story about a parent who's dealing with the COVID pandemic. So in the beginning of the story, it goes like this. We're all thinking to ourselves, well, we're going to be here for about a week, so we'll just kind of see how this goes. We'll take it day by day. Then all of a sudden it becomes, okay, not a week. This is happening. Okay, let's set this up. I guess we'll get everyone on a computer and we'll get some materials, and I don't know, we'll figure out what the schools are doing. Oh, they're doing this, and now we're going to have to change because now they're doing this. And I'm just going to try to make this work, is kind of where we were in the beginning of all of this. And then we got to the middle, which for everyone is sort of different, I know, but we're saying, oh my gosh, this is just crazy. What are we doing? Is this even worth it? We have kids crying and computers are crashing and there's work that we don't understand how to do. And is this really what school's like for my child? I don't even know what to do with anything. And then we ask for advice. And so we ask the school for advice, and people are asking me for advice, and people are calling their pediatricians, and everyone's saying all kinds of different things, right? So we have professionals who are saying, oh no, we have to make sure that we get all of this stuff into your child's brain, because if we don't, they're going to be so behind. And then we have other people saying that we need to just chill and don't worry, just take care of their emotional health, you're all good. And then we have other people who are maybe somewhere in between. So it's just that no one's on the same page, and it's really hard to deal with information when it's coming to you like that. So I'm just gonna put this there, right? At the end of all of this, we all just want to know, what do we really have to be focusing on here? Really, just somebody really just break it down for me. So that's what I hope tonight's gonna offer you, because I really do feel you. I'm a mom of 3 kids. I am here. This is my story. And I feel that right now, part of my drive to create this webinar was to actually sit down and answer this question for myself. So I hope what I have to offer is connective. So if you connect to this story and you have any comments about what I'm talking about, just throw it right in the chat and I'll definitely take a look. I'm kind of doing that as I move slides here, but definitely feel free to participate, be like, yeah, me too, that's totally it, or not really, whatever you want. So just to introduce myself to those people who are on here who do not know about me, my name is Mary Neely. I founded the Evolved Education Company. We tutor and consult with families primarily in New York, but since COVID hit, we are now really serving families from all over the place, which has been an interesting pivot for us. And we do support kids in school. We also support teachers to help them to teach well. So it is a really dynamic and interesting company that I work within. I am personally a learning specialist. I am a permanently certified special educator from K to 12, and I'm also a parent of 3. I've been in the field of education for 25 years now, so I've seen a lot, I've done a lot, and I can tell you that nothing has really come close to what we're experiencing right now. So I really do feel like it's definitely time to get out some new ideas. So I feel like I'm getting this question a lot, and I'm definitely feeling it too. So just give it to me straight. What do I need to do right now? Just come on, tell me, right? So I'm going to answer that. I promise I am. But before I do, what I really want you to do, and yes, I'm going to make you do some work here, is to take a moment. If you're a teacher, you could perhaps think of a child in your class. If you're a parent right now, you can think of your own child or children. And I kind of want you just to seriously write down their names. And I want you to imagine them about, 25, when they're about 25 years old. And I want you to answer some of these questions. And I'm really going to stop talking and let you have some time to write. So I want to know, what do you want them to be like? So give me some adjectives there. What do you want your relationship to be like with them? And what do you hope their education has provided? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. I'm going to write down some of my ideas too. So I'm just going to get some paper here. And we're just going to write for a minute. You can take out your phone. You could write yourself a little note there. Okay, so you can definitely come back to this if it was an interesting exercise for you, but I hope that you had a moment just to really truly think about where you might want to go. If anyone wants to share anything, you don't necessarily have to share your kid's identity, but if you want to share some of the thoughts and ideas that you had around your child. You could do that in the chat. That way everyone else could benefit from your ideas as well. I wonder what you all were writing in terms of just what do you want your child to be like? What do you want your relationship to be like with them? And what do you hope their education has provided? So if you want to share something, I'll definitely kind of keep looking over there. But if not, we'll just kind of continue on. If you're curious, some things sometimes I think about would be that I really want my children to have something that inspires them to do every day. So something that they're, intrigued with. I want them to be able with me to be able to talk with me about problems they're having. So I would love for them to be able just to call me and kind of talk through things that they're dealing with. And I always want to have that open sense of dialogue. And I hope that their education has provided them with a lot of tools and skills and exposure to ideas, and that their brains are really capable of handling really tough things like what we're going through right now, for instance. So I don't know if that connects to what you all are thinking and doing, but I'm going to carry on. All right. So when I think about teaching parents, how to teach their kids, I think it's really important that we talk briefly about what kind of mind are we making, because teaching really is instructional. It's a way that we're conveying an idea or a notion or a skill or a concept to another. And so I just think it's important to take a pause and kind of think about what kind of a mind are you making. So I look at some of the activities, for example, that kids are doing in school, and I sometimes go, what does that do for the mind? So I'll just sort of name a few that I'm thinking about. So let's say a child is learning to read. So they're learning to read words, and they have to identify sounds to learn those words. They have to learn more and more and more vocabulary. Well, that seems really helpful in helping a child to develop language and to develop their ability to communicate and share what's in their brains out to the world, right? So it also allows them to read and to have that ability to engage with content that they may not know of otherwise. So that's one activity. Let's say there's another activity, and the activity has to do with adding fractions. And that's the activity that the teachers are teaching. And the way in which the instruction is happening is we're going to make the denominators the same, and then we're going to put the numbers together, and you're going to end up with the sum of these fractions. And then you're going to do 40 practice problems after that to make sure you really know how to do that skill. So what is that activity doing for the mind? Well, it's teaching a student a skill. It's teaching a student to practice for mastery of that skill. It's perhaps, if their questioning is eliciting some of the conceptual piece of the fractions, it's giving them some number sense around numbers. So there's always a purpose for the work that we do in school. There's some kind of connection to the mind, to learning, to increasing the brain's capacity to be thinking about different topics and different concepts and gaining skills and tools. And that's why we send our kids to school. And that's why they do English and math and history and science and languages and so on and so forth, right? So when you, the parent, now have this child at home, and you have to not only sort of support a child doing their school work all day long, but perhaps there's other things that you're noticing that you would like to teach your child because you're the parent and you're the primary teacher anyway in life. It's always important to be thinking first about, what am I doing with my child that is connecting to their brain and their mind, and sort of what is that connection? So I'm going to get into this a little later in the series, but I just want to start there and getting you thinking about this part of your child. I'm going to tell you a little story about a to-do list, and it really does connect to all of this, I think, in a very important way. So I run a company which has some staff in it. And when I was originally bringing this staff on and into the company, I gave them all a manual that had different tasks that I would assign them every week to do. And then they would report back to me once those tasks were done. I very quickly learned that this is a very, very, very poor way of running a staff. And I'll tell you why. Because as soon as the to-do list was done, the staff member was done. And there was no real thinking around what to do next. So what ended up happening was that everyone was coming to me when their to-do lists were done, and they were asking for more things to do. This didn't really work out so well because I had my own things to do. And during the week, I would get emails and pings around, I need more things to do. So I started to read about leadership and just about what other people were doing when they brought on staff. And I came across a podcast where I learned about a self-managed team. That was the concept. And I listened to the podcast episode, and it taught me that a really helpful way to organize your team is to assign your team responsibilities, and then to give them tools to meet those responsibilities, but to really put the responsibilities onto the staff member so that you can allow them the space and the opportunity to problem solve, to think, to be resourceful, to learn, to grow, all of the good things that we also want for our kids. So I tell you this story because you are the leader of your own company, and it is your home, your family, your children. And you can operate in the very similar sense when you're teaching your child, in that if you approach it with, today, here's your agenda for the day, kids, here's what we're going to do from start to finish, to finish, to finish, and all of this, it is really difficult for your child to have any real ownership over their process of learning. And they're going to finish that list, and then they're going to be running to you to figure out what to do next. In addition, a child that sees a to-do list every day, first of all, I just want you to think about that for a second. If you were assigned a to-do list every day by your boss, maybe you are, maybe that's okay for you. But in general, right, you have this to-do list every day from someone else, and you don't really know why you're doing all of these things, but you're doing them. It must feel daunting. It must feel disconnected. It must feel all kinds of things that I don't think we're going for. That is my point. So we want to go back to the whole notion of what kind of mind are you making? What kind of mind do you want? Go back to the original question that I asked. Where do you want to be when your child is 25? And I think we would all agree that we would like our child to be able to think, to have a connection to the learning and the work that we're doing, to feel empowered when a problem comes their way, to solve that problem, to ask questions that are intriguing or curiosity driven, and to really be engaged with the work. It's really hard when a child is disengaged from work for them to exude the behavior that we might desire from them during the day. So someone asked earlier that, what do I do if my second grader loses steam by 9:30? And I guess I would have some questions to ask around that. And I just ask the questions. It's okay, by the way, this is a safe place to explore ideas. And if this doesn't work for you, that's okay. These are my ideas, not my answers. I'm very clear on that in how I pose people's questions. I'm always saying, these are my ideas. But my idea to you is, I think it would be interesting to explore the connection that your child has to the work that's being delivered. And it would be interesting to explore what kind of connection you could bring and help him or her with in regard to the work. And by that, I mean that there are certain things that may happen on the computer and that might feel a little disconnected to a child. It feels disconnected to me as an adult when I'm talking and teaching people. I'm used to having lots of live interactions and being able to read the audience and all of these things. So is there a way that you could bring in some connection? Playing with your child is always very good. Reading with your child is always a really helpful thing to do. And playing a game. I know I was working with a student who was studying, this was actually a year ago now, but he was studying the Oregon Trail. And we were really struggling with the reading. It was just not going well, and it was a fight, and there were lots of things happening around that reading assignment. And I brought in the Oregon Trail game, which is just something on the computer. And we played the Oregon Trail game in the beginning of the lesson. And then we got to the reading, and there was actually so much more connection to what was happening in the story because the child had actually experienced the learning of this trail. And so there was so much less resistance happening because of that connection. So similarly, right now, one of my sons is doing algebra, and he was having real difficulty getting through. They had assigned a pretty large amount of problems, and I felt as though he just wasn't really connecting. It was almost like busy work. And so I just started to draw out what the problems were actually showing him. I mean, because, you know, it's just giving them a connection, like a visual of some kind to connect, or a video. Today I was texted into by a mom whose child was struggling with a math concept, and I found a video and sent it to her. And it made all the difference because the child really just needed that connection. He needed to understand what was happening to, you know, within the work. So I also just want to say, before I get on to the next part, and by the way, feel free to ping into the chat if anything is connected to you or anything is speaking to you. I'll start reading some of the chat in a second. But I just want to say also that I really want to present this idea to you, that leading with life skills is also a really interesting way of formatting in your own brain how to teach your child, as opposed to subjects and tasks. It's almost very connected to that whole to-do list concept for me. And I'm excited to present to you the ideas I have a little later on, because what it did for me and for my husband, we actually just started to think about our children in the concepts that I have to follow. And it really did make a huge difference, because it felt like we were bringing ourselves out of the to-do lists and into something larger and more inclusive of more of the child. I know this might not make sense yet, but it's going to, promise. All right, I'm just going to check in with the chat for a second. Do you have any strategies? Eva says, do you have any strategies for kids to choose to read over other things like screens? I often think they would like reading more if they chose it more often, but I don't know how to get them to read without it making it seem like a punishment. I think that's a really, really, really good question. And what I would offer as an idea on that would be to read with them and get them engaged in some kind of reading that perhaps even bridges to something that they're really connected with, like if it is online. But that would be one idea. The other idea is just to make it part of the schedule where everyone in the whole entire house, if you can do that, is reading. And I wouldn't belabor it. I wouldn't try not to make it a chore in and of itself, but just say you can read really anything, and try to kind of pull away from that control over they have to read a novel or a book or anything like that. I know, for example, my husband reads almost all day long. He's reading on his phone mostly, but he's reading, you know, Twitter. He's reading the different reports from the athletic departments, or he's always catching up on facts and news and things of that kind. And that's his style of reading. And my style of reading is to read books, and I like reading about education and child development. And if I have my say, that's where I'm going to go and do my reading. So just like us, right, children are going to prefer certain types of reading. And I think it's really empowering when you can just kind of make the allowance for that to happen, and try to let go of what you think, they should be doing. It may come as they make more connections to text. I was sort of surprised with this with my one son, where he was really into like the comic books for a really long time. It felt like a really long time. And I was a little worried, coming from being a teacher and really like appreciating literature, that we weren't going to get to the chapter books. And I read to him a lot, and I was really trying. And then I finally kind of let it go. And he started reading these, like the Dog Man. I'm in the kids' room. So I'm, the Diary of the Wimpy Kid, and the, Dog Man books. But in reading a lot of these books, he really doesn't have an aversion to reading. So when we do read something for school, or we read something for anything else, I really feel like we can have conversations about how they're the same or different from the books he chooses to read and he loves to read. And he actually said something kind of interesting to me at one point. He said, Mom, the reason I like reading those books is because they do the pictures for me. I really hate making the pictures in my own brain. And I thought that was so actually astute. I mean, it's pretty amazing, right? So I just want to go back and make sure I'm answering all the questions. So yeah, I like your approach to, or connecting our games with class. Yeah, that's really great to do. I think, similarly, movies are really great. I know a lot of times kids are not necessarily watching movies these days, but with our kids, when this COVID started, we started doing like family movie night for a couple nights in a row. And we watched the Searching for Bobby Fischer. And all of a sudden, all three of my kids were playing chess. And they were into chess. It was like the best thing they've ever seen. And then I started reading some stuff on chess with them and trying to get them involved with it. And you can definitely kind of bring in themes. I know a lot of teachers do this in their classroom, where they'll bring in themes of the week. And if you want to do that, it could be really fun for you in your family right now to say, let's pick a theme like that everyone's interested in, and we'll just like study it all week. We'll watch Brain Pops. We'll like make something with it. And let your kids kind of contribute, because again, you want to make that meaning and help them make that meaning. If you are working with a first grader who is learning to read and struggles with the simplicity of the stories she can read versus the complexity of stories she is able to watch on the screen, or even the reading I can do aloud with her. Yes. So this is really a common, I hope Maria's on here. Maria, say hi if you are. Maria is an amazing reading specialist who I've learned so much from. And I hope you would agree with me, Maria. Maybe you can help me answer this question. But I think, it's very common in the reading process and learning to read for children to struggle with the act of actually reading the words and the match of the interest level. I think that's what you're asking. And I would just sort of recognize that and name it. And I think your daughter would appreciate you giving some language to it. Like, this story, you're going to get here. Like, this is where you're going to get to read these stories. It's going to be really exciting. And we have to learn these words for you to get here, but it's just a stepping stone. Like, I have to do that too with my learning. And then it might pique her interest. It might have something that would be very motivating for her. Like, it would present something very motivating for her. But I think it is a very normal place to be. I know a lot of first and second graders even are having this difference between what they can read themselves and then the interest level. And so when you're reading with her, I would maybe vary up what you're doing with her, so that at times she's learning to read her words and other times you're reading to her. So having the mix of experience, I think, could be really helpful. If you email me after this, I can connect you with Maria, who would probably be able to offer you like really, really specific advice on that one too. All right, so let's get into this. So I just wanted to recognize that as parents, we're certainly not necessarily child development experts, but it is good to know this stuff just because you are, again, the teacher in life for your child. So I just wanted to put this slide in to remind you a little bit about where your child cognitive development is right now. And this is where I do get interested, I would just say, in making sure that our children are developing and are not losing time right now to develop the very things their brains really are primed to engage with right now. So for instance, if your child is between 6 and 8 years old, there's this rapid development of mental skills happening. So it's the perfect time to be, learning to read. It's the perfect time to be developing that basic number sense. And if we sort of adopt a lackadaisical attitude around, well, we'll just sort of pick up in the fall, that's a lot of time for a child to not be stimulating their brains in a learning atmosphere. And so I do really feel very, very strongly that it is important that all of our children have the opportunity to meet their learning needs and have the stimulation that they need right now based on their development. So if you notice, as you progress in the years, we have 9 to 11-year-old children have an increased attention span. Let's use that. Let's get them to be reading for longer periods of time. Let's get them to be thinking about math and writing longer pieces and really getting engaged in that. Something that I think is a really great use of time right now for parents is to write. We do something in teaching which is called a collaborative write, where the teacher will write a little something and then the child will write a little something, and parents can do this very easily even if you're not even writing, meaning you can at dinner do a round robin where everyone adds a sentence to a story that you start. And you might think it's not writing, but it is the formation of writing to speak and to be able to share ideas. I was working with a very reluctant writer this week, and it's crucial to bring in positivity and excitement around writing, the same way that we do perhaps with reading. Maybe reading is more intuitive around this, but writing is the most amazing thing that we can ever do as human beings, because it's the way that we permanently share our ideas with the world, and no one has the same ideas as you. So if you can provide a passion and a love and just a purpose to your children around writing, or really, math and reading too, but I am speaking about writing right now. This is a really great position for you to be in as a parent, is to applaud them and tell them why they're spending time doing that. So someone was asking earlier, oh no, you don't see my slides. Thanks, Shannon. I must be sharing the wrong thing. Darn. I really appreciate that. Let me see if I can get that up for you. Hold on. Let's see if you have this. Can someone tell me if I've got the slides now on the chat? This is where the roll with it kind of attitude helps me out. I'm just like, oh well, what am I gonna do? Let me see. Can somebody tell me if they see the slides? Yay! Okay, I'll show you the rest of them later. I'll put them up on the website. Okay, I'm so sorry that you weren't able to see them. You're just looking at my silly Zoom screen. They were zoomed in. Are they better now? Are they better now? Can someone say yes? I don't know. Oh, are they still zoomed in? Okay. Well, I hope this is okay. I'm just going to keep going with it, and I'll keep looking over at the chat. Okay, everyone says it's good. Okay, awesome. Here we go. All right. So this is like me reading my audience. It's a whole new world for me. Okay. So where was I? Writing. Yes. So my favorite thing to do when I teach kids is to remind them of the power of learning what they're learning. Like kids do this. I was a math teacher for many, many years. And kids would always say, why do I have to learn this? I'm never going to use this in my whole life. And I'd say to them, it's not about the content always. It's about the way that you think. It's about the exposure to something that is different. It's a different perspective. It's a different way of thinking about the world. And in some ways, math is also history, because it's someone else has examined the world and this is how they thought about it. And this is the quantitative way of thinking about the world. So I think that's a good tool for you to use as a parent too. If your child is really disconnecting from what they're learning in school right now or in any subject, you can be empowered to try to communicate to them the value of that task or that way of thinking. And if you're not sure, you can always ask. That's always okay. All right. Anyway, so we're getting back to child development. So 9 to 11 years old children also become more independent. They can have stronger executive functioning. Executive functioning, if you're not sure about this term as a parent, that's okay. It is essentially the regulatory processes that your brain takes part in order for you to be able to execute a task. So it's your organization, it's your focus, your sustained focus. It's your ability to set a goal and actually maneuver towards it. It's your ability to think flexibly and to take different perspectives and see other people's points of view. So reading for a 9 to 11-year-old can be really an amazing process, because children are able to look at reading and different characters' stories from different points of view. And you can start to have these really fun, engaging conversations about how your family is actually different from that family, and the way that this country is doing things with COVID is different than what that country is doing with COVID. I mean, there's so many different kinds of conversations that you can have right now with your 9 to 11-year-olds that you perhaps couldn't necessarily have in such an engaging way with a 6 to 8-year-old, right? So 12 to 14-year-olds, if you have any of those in your lives, it's definitely a time in which they are able to have more complex thoughts. They're able to definitely understand, what's right, what's wrong. They can express feelings and really understand and have empathy. So you definitely want to tap into child development as you're teaching and in the role of a parent. If you're interested in more, the CDC has more resources, and you can definitely take a look at that. All right. So now we're going to get into some of my unique ideas around this role of teaching your children right now. And I'm going to get into this question. What are some high impacts areas for learning, and how much do you, as in you, the audience, know about them? So if I were to tell you, what's something that you could think about in terms of learning that would make the most impact on your child, you might know some things. Like you might say to me, well, like, let's see if you put some ideas down on the chat. So what are some high impact areas for learning? What would you answer to that? So would you say reading, decoding text? Yes, Shannon says decoding text, definitely. Anybody else want to share? Take a drink of water, give you a minute. Anybody have any other high impact areas for learning? Okay. Well, I'm going to get into some of my ideas on this and see if that helps. Okay. So it might surprise you, these ideas that I have, but I'm going to try to make sense of them to you a little bit right now. So key aspects of learning development and that parents can focus on right now do not necessarily have to do with the smaller types of tasks and skills that we teach our children, like, for example, decoding or reading or number sense for math, or making sure that they do their chores at home, or making sure they know how to solve a problem with their sibling, or being a good person in the world. So we're not necessarily thinking in the task-oriented area, right? So similar to how I started the presentation, I wanted to give you, the parents, some responsibility areas to really think about so that it will help you to see your child and be able to problem solve within that particular arena that really has, if you sort of made a Venn diagram of these three areas, these three areas will incorporate all of the things I just mentioned before: decoding, number sense, getting along with your siblings, being able to communicate a problem, all of those things. But for you, the parent, it will be easier for you to walk away from this webinar tonight and kind of hold on to your responsibility areas. So what I mean by this is, let's take the notion of perspective taking. So let's just say I said to you, the parent, when you walk away tonight, what I want you to think about is how you can facilitate your child's ability to improve their perspective taking. So if you focus on that, what you will be doing is you will be talking with them about the different characters' points of view. You will be examining with your kindergarten student the different ways that colors come together to form other colors. You will be engaging in conversations around math that have to do with, well, how did you go about solving this problem? Well, I don't know. How did you go about solving this problem? Or you might ask your child, what happened when you got into a fight with your child, with your brother today? Can you tell me your side of the story? They have to communicate back to you. The other child, how come that happened? Could you tell me your side of the story? Right? They have to tell it back to you. So if you're kind of focused on this perspective taking and your job, you know that your ownership as a parent is going to be to facilitate your child's ability to build up their perspective taking in all of the different activities that they're doing all day long in distance learning, but also in making the dinner, in cleaning up the dinner. We have responsibilities as a team. Why do we do that? Because mom and dad worked all day and we're all in this house together, and all of these things have to happen. And so from my perspective, right, if I take it all on, then I'm not going to have time to do other things that you guys want me to do with you. So I'm asking for help. So in writing, we can take other people's perspectives into account and we can write about those. And I love doing journals with my kids. We do this especially when things are just feeling not so great. One of my kids likes to do it more than others, but I'll just write them a little note and I'll say, this happened to me today. What do you think about it? And my other child, will write back and share with me some of his ideas. And you can slip in to all of this any academic skills you feel are really, really important to your child. But you don't necessarily have to make that your only focus. You can kind of put everything in the context of perspective taking. I want to also say that I did a deeper dive into each of these three ideas, and I wrote an article today, which I posted on our website, and you can go there right now and you can look at it while I'm talking if you want. And it talks about specific ideas for parents to, like activities to do for each of these three arenas. So if you want even more ideas, you can go on there and look at them. But let's talk about communication. So let's say I said to you, your job after this webinar is to go home and make sure that your child is communicating and that you're really improving their ability to communicate. What a powerful thing to work on as a parent, right? If we improve our child's ability to communicate, that means we're building their vocabulary. We're working on teaching them to read, because if they have more abilities to decode words, then they're going to have better access to the written word, which is going to just increase their ability to communicate with other people, because they're going to have a greater fund of general knowledge, right? So you can teach your child to communicate about math. My favorite thing to do in math with my kids and anybody's kids is to talk about it. I ask them questions like, why does it do that? Why do you make those denominators the same? I don't really even get it. This is so strange, right? And then you get them to talk about it, or you get them to be curious about it, and they can talk back to you about what they think about the math. There's a real emphasis right now in the world of education around communication, especially in math, especially in science, especially in every subject. In fact, the number one thing that most kids are tutored around in my company is writing, because children really do need to learn how to write, especially as they get into higher levels of education. But also, if you're in a profession now, any kind of profession, you have to be able to write emails, you have to be able to write to your staff, you have to write your own ideas perhaps for projects you're doing. And writing doesn't just come in the form of an essay. It could come in the form of a visual. It could come in the form of labeling. I was writing a course a couple weeks ago. I couldn't figure out how it was going to all go together. I normally write an outline. I decided to do something different. I took out Post-it notes, I kid you not, and I put Post-it notes on the table, and I wrote down my ideas, and then I couldn't quite figure out how they were going to go together. So I'm just fiddling around with these Post-it notes. That's writing, right? It's writing down your ideas and getting them out there into the world. So communication is a really important arena for you as a parent to think about your task of teaching your children. So I'm going over to the chat. So if anyone is like connecting to this, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to be able to make sure I'm explaining this in the best way possible for you. So feel free to ask, feel free to say, that's interesting, or I just don't see what it is, whatever you think. Lots of tantrums in my house. How old are your kids? Tell me how old so I can gear that a little bit. So purpose is a huge one. So if I said to you, your job today as a teacher of your children is to facilitate in their own existence a purpose and a connection. So another way of saying a purpose, I think, is like a connection. So connecting to the ideas that they're learning about, or, connecting to things that are in the world, right? We want to make sure that children are not just reading something, but they're also connecting to what they're seeing outside of the world, and that it's meaningful to them, right? And if it's not meaningful, then they're not really going to learn it. So in learning theory, there's a lot of theories out there in learning theory, and I really feel one of my favorites, it has to do with just that connection and the impact that making meaning has on the learning experience. So with math in particular, I keep going back to that a little bit, but it's very interesting to me how different it's taught in different types of schools. And I think the most effective mathematicians, kids who really appreciate math, that comes from really making meaning of what they're working with. And if you can, as a parent, approach your teaching with your children in a way that really facilitates the why and that connection, you're going to have a lot more success. So let me just get to a couple questions. So the tantrums, I'm going to get to a couple questions now. I'm just going to deviate from the macro tips for a minute and get over to some questions, which might be a little all over the map, but I'm totally cool with that. So lots of tantrums, 6.5 and 3.5. I would say it's very normal. Getting back to executive functioning. So the slide that I was talking about before with child development. So their executive functioning is not mature yet, and so the regulation is really what is likely at play there. And it's normal for the kids to melt down. I know when I was bringing my kids to preschool as a 4-year-old, even by the time I picked them up, we would pick up, they'd be like, hi, we're so happy to see you, and we'd be walking home, we'd walk in the house and boom, meltdown, right? And so now you're with your child all day and they maybe aren't sort of holding it all together because they're at school. Maybe they're really truly reacting to different parts of their days that feel dysregulated, or they're just feeling dysregulated, right? So we can explore that more on another topic, but you might want to read up on some tips for handling regulation. There's something called a sensory diet, which I've learned a lot about. My kids all have sensory issues and we try to manage that. One fun fact. So we have this thing in my house where the kids can be on the computer or like the laptop only on the weekends. I mean, this was before the distance learning stuff. And now they're on the computers like all day, right? And we let them play their video games now every day because what else are they going to do, right? And we let them FaceTime with their friends and their cousins and all of this. And so by the end of the day, I feel like my kids are on the computer for maybe, 8 hours, 6 hours a day or something. And we kind of detoxed that last weekend. And then today we noticed that the kids were really just feeling. It was a feeling of dysregulation in the house. And so we didn't have video games today, and it was a really peaceful evening. So I don't know if there's something to that, but pay attention to those kinds of things. I think it's helpful. Okay, how do I get kids to communicate their frustration more effectively? So that's a really great question, and I think it goes into the communication piece, which I would say the way to help your children communicate their feelings or their experiences is to model and to expose them to stories around the success that people have when they handle themselves in a healthy way. So, you know, you can read stories to them. You can make up stories if you can't find one right now. You can certainly model for them what you hope they could do. Like, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. These are things I'm going to do when I feel frustrated. Sometimes I do that with my kids and they look at me like, I don't know, you know, they just like the mom, and I'll be frustrated and I'll just be like, I'm so frustrated. I need to have a break. And I will just walk into the other room and like slam the door. And they just kind of know, like, I really did need to have a break. And I think that's really normal. And I think if you can just model that for them, and then when they mess up, you can be like, you know, when I get frustrated, do you know what I do? Do you know what I do? Do you remember what I do? And that's a really positive, teachable moment, right? Where you can do that. Or you can be like, you know what I should do? Which is sometimes what you do say. Totally get that. When the kids journal, should you edit their work or let them write as they wish? So I would say actually the answer to that is a little more complicated. It's not either or. So in the writing process, kids plan, they organize, they write, they revise, and they edit. So what you want to do actually is you just want to communicate with your child where they are in the writing process. And you can ask them, you can say, are you in the planning stage of this? Or are you in the writing stage of this? Are you ready to edit this? Because if you're ready to edit it, that means that everything has been moved around and you just really want me to edit for like spelling and punctuation and capitalization, then I'll help you do that. I'll teach you what you have to do. There's an acronym that I use with kids around writing. It's called POWRE, P-O-W-R-E. So it's plan, organize, write, revise, and then edit. And I'll type it into the chat so you have it. So this is it's power, but with the R and the E reversed. And so what you can do is you can just like teach your kids that that's the writing process, and then they can get comfortable in teaching you when they're ready for you to edit their work. I really think editing work is really important. I know some teachers don't always agree with that part of like, they want, you know, kids to do inventive spelling. And I'm not actually saying anything different. I think kids should do inventive spelling, but I also think that kids should know how to edit their work and when that is supposed to happen in the process. So hopefully that helps you. Keep the questions going. I'm happy to make sure you have all those answers. So, all right. So teaching 101. We're almost at time, and I promise we don't actually have much more, but I just want to give you as much as I can in the time. So essentially, when you're teaching children, right, when teachers teach children, we do learn ways to do that. And, you know, you're a parent and maybe you are a teacher, which is great, but you're not in the classroom setting, and it's really is different being at home with you're the parent, right? So when you're a teacher, you can approach this in a business kind of way, right? So you're like, okay, there's a curriculum map, there's objectives, there's lesson plans, and it divides some learning experiences and all of those things, right? But when you're a parent and you're teaching your child, it's much more complicated because you are the person in your child's life that is also looking for affirmation, love, someone to hug, someone to cry on, someone to talk through stuff with. It's really blurry, right? So you can do all of these things, but I also want you to be comfortable with the role you play, in that you can also be the mom that says, you know what, I'm going to put my teacher hat on right now, which is going to be different than my mom hat. And I'm going to definitely teach you how to write this sentence, right? But I would be careful around pushing on that like authoritarian placement onto your child during this time, or really any time, because getting back to the beginning, when I was talking about who do you want to have a relationship with when they're 25, and what is that going to look like to you, right? And I think many of the parents that are hopefully, on here tonight would agree that you really do want your child to have affirmation and to have a healthy sense of self and to be able to come to you and problem solve and be vulnerable with you, and not to be concerned about that. So these things are all things that you can do, but you do want to recognize that dance that you're going to be involved in as you're doing it. I do it, by the way. I do all of these things with my kids, in fact, but I do also ask them, and I sort of name it too. I say, I'm going to be the teacher right now. So is that okay? Like, are we going to be okay with having this interchange kind of thing? Yeah. So I hope that's helpful. Any other questions? Oh, hey, Maria. Maria's there. Good. Okay. So we have scaffolding is another good one. So scaffolding you can definitely use as parents. It's basically delivering bite-sized pieces to your child with increased levels of complexity. So it's almost like climbing a ladder, but the ladder gets a little wider every time. So if you notice that your child is having tantrums or meltdowns over, let's say, reading or writing or math or whatever they're doing in school, you might look at it and it might be too much. That's a really important message, because this has happened to me all week. Parents have been calling and saying, I don't know, they're not learning this. And I'm like, well, that's too much to learn in one time. And you might just need to deliver one thing at a time. If your child has to write a paragraph for school and they're crying about it, just have them write one sentence and then leave and then come back to it. And let's write another sentence. Let's maybe write 2 sentences that next time. So it's okay to scaffold. You can also employ the I do, we do, you do, which is I'm going to model it for you so you can see what it looks like. And then we're going to do it together. And then now you're going to do it on your own. That's a really great way of teaching your child, because nothing gets really fuzzy there. It's just kind of, this is the way we do it. And then, we're going to do it together, and then you're going to do it. Kind of like riding a bike. I'm going to ride the bike. We're going to ride the bike. Unfortunately, now you're going to ride the bike. Yay. Okay. So making meaning and keeping meaning. So meaning is everything. I should have almost made it a macro topic, but it's like meaning, 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 meaning. That's a really good job as a parent to focus on too. It's like, it's purpose, really. It's like, trying to make sure they understand everything that they're coming in contact with, and really delivering that exchange, or having a place for that discussion. Really good stuff. Okay, so here's my quote. To succeed at parenting right now, we have to adopt the mindset of giving categories to focus on. I can celebrate and promote my child to learn well. So I really wanted you just to have a minute to digest that. So similar to the to-do list that we started off with, right? If we can kind of get away from that component of life with our kids and just like checking off the boxes, like, okay, they're reading, that's done, right? Or, oh, okay, they know this math for the first grade. They know all the stuff for first grade. Okay, perfect, we're done, right? Instead of that, just knowing that you're their lifelong teacher. You always are, you always will be. And try to think more in terms of just categories, and you're going to get to it all, right? And it is important to read, and it is important to do the math. It is important to be learning right now. No question. You're doing it all, which is awesome. But I hope this shift helps you. So I just wanted to get a moment. Could you go on chat, and could you just share with everyone, because maybe your ideas will help another person here tonight, and just share, taking this information. What are you going to do? Seriously, like in action going forward, what are you taking away? And again, by writing it down, it helps you to solidify it for yourself. But what are you going to do that's going to promote your child tomorrow within perspective taking, within communication, within purpose? And again, if you want to do a deeper dive into these macro concepts, go to the webpage. I wrote an article where I go into each of these macro concepts, and I tell you lots of ideas of things to do. Someone had written an email to me earlier today asking about what's the recommendation on screen time right now, and how do I get my kids like off the screen time right now? And I would say there's plenty of ideas in that article for what you can do off screen time with your kids. And your kids, by the way, have a ton of ideas too. They really do. If you allow them and, boundary up the space a little bit for them to be bored enough to figure out some things to do. But it's really important, to recognize that we're in a really unprecedented time. So there are no real recommendations right now, but I would just watch your kids and see if you notice them being really dysregulated, or if you notice them not connecting. I know some of my teenagers right now are retreating into their phones and into the screens and really avoiding any other kinds of contact. And that's not healthy either. So we definitely want to keep an eye on things. And if you need to pull it away for a day, just email the teacher and say, you know what, we're taking a day off the screens and we're just going to do some of these things that are in this article. That's okay. That's really okay to do. It's not, again, you're thinking bigger picture as the teacher parent. So try to go there. Okay, awesome. So I love that. The paragraph, yes. So, right, why are you doing the assignments? So that's a great takeaway. We really need to do some more to contextualize for our daughter why she is doing these assignments, and that she needs to be accountable for her own work. For younger kids, Maria was saying, right, you can use COPS for the editing. That's capitalization. It's an acronym. So it's capitalization, organization, punctuation, and spelling. That's an editing part. The tip of coming back to things when they seem overwhelming to kids, like writing a paragraph. I'm going to try that with my 7-year-old tomorrow. Yeah, it's a great tool. I think anytime we can share with kids the power of writing, it's like a total passion of mine. I love like blowing kids' minds by saying, writing is really your voice. You want to learn how to do it. I want to learn how to do it better all the time, because it's like how I get to have my ideas out there. Scaffolding for 2nd grade, bringing a wider experience into the lesson. That's great. Those are great takeaways. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. So I'm just going to end here with a couple of additional offers. So this is a quote from my friend Helen Dayan at the Dayan Group. I was so privileged to do a workshop with her last week, and she says, "Be strong enough to stand alone, smart enough to know when you need help, and brave enough to ask for it." So I'm not sure if she said it, but it was from her presentation, so I had a nod to her. That's to Helen. So you can definitely consult with me. This is what I do for a living. I offer tutoring. We offer consultations with parents. We have plenty of these kinds of free resources. It's all about getting, our name out there to families that we serve. So I really appreciate your support. And Maria is always happy to help all of our young readers. I noticed she's on here, so I'm so have to give her a shout out. All right, well, we already did that. That was my extra slide, I guess. Oh yeah, and that's how you can contact me if you need to. So, all right, thanks so much everybody for participating, and I will close out this webinar. I really appreciate you attending. I hope that was interesting. Have a good night. You're welcome. I love seeing everybody's thank yous. That's so kind. Hi, Anita.